it'll be really handy when it comes to containers that do dynamic resizing and splitting and such. So I'll show you that here when we get there. But I just wanted to mention it here and just show you that pretty much you can dock on the bottom, the left, you can dock on the right, you can dock on the top, or you can fill, which will obviously fill the whole form. And that's where it's going to come in handy when we have split containers. And we'll talk about that shortly. I just kind of wanted to mention that because it is a pretty simple property to get the hang of. There's not much more to it than that, but I'll just want to show you some good uses for it coming up. So that's anchoring and a little bit of docking there, and that's really where the power of scaling comes into play, is through those properties. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into layout controls and get a little more familiar with these layout controls. Now, we just looked at the group box control, and we know that's a great control for grouping controls together on your form, and it gives us a visual, and the user a visual appearance that these controls are grouped. Well, let's open up our layout controls form here, and let's head on over to our toolbox and expand it. And you can see inside of the containers section here, if you expand this node, you'll see all of our container controls. And again, we just looked at the group box. Let's take a look at the panel control. The panel control, if we hold our click and drag it onto our form, you can see we can put it right onto our form, and I'll go ahead and resize it here. But this is very similar to the group box control. The only real difference here, initially, is that it doesn't have a visual border on it by default. But we can add a visual border. So that's kind of one of the big differences here, is we have control over the visual appearance of the panel itself. And you can see that right here, the default property that it highlights for us is border style. So you can put a fixed single on it, which is just a single line border around it. You can also give it that 3D look and feel if you want to add a little pizzazz to it. And there we go. So the difference between the panel control and the group box control functionally is pretty much the same, because they're used to group controls together. It's just a matter of if you want the user to see that these controls are grouped together. But the panel is a very easy way to group controls, and to gives you an eeasy way of hiding a group of controls rather than control by itself. Another really nice thing about the panel control is that it allows for auto scrolling, and you have to turn auto scroll to true for this to work. But basically what that means here is if you put controls inside of the panel control, and just throw a few in here, I'll throw a button in there, maybe a label in there, and if you keep filling this up either dynamically or statically, and the controls go outside of the bounds of the panel, what will happen is scroll bars will automatically appear on here, so the user can scroll in this control. So that's what makes it, really separates it from the group box, is that it is scrollable. Another nice feature here is it's actually sizable too. And the auto size works very similar to that, in that if controls go outside of the bounds of it, it will work based on the auto size mode here. If it'll grow, so this control will actually expand as the controls go outside of the bounds, or you can also do a grow and shrink, so it'll shrink with the controls as well. So panel control, very nice, easy control to work with, very similar to the group box, and that's how that works. Now let's move on to the flow panel and the table panel controls. These are both brand new controls in the .NET 2.0 framework, and they were really meant to help us take away the monotony of lining up our controls, because everyone when they build their applications, you want to have nice even spacing amongst all your controls in your form and to make them look professional looking, right? And that's a very monotonous part of programming as far as user interface design goes, because there's a lot of wasted time that goes into making sure all that works. Now with .NET 2.0, we have a lot of guides that help us within the interface itself. And just to show you here, if I drop down the toolbox, let's just go ahead and get a text box out of here, throw it on the form. You want everything to line up perfectly. So you want your label here, you want your text box to line up evenly with your labels, and your buttons to line up evenly with everything else. And you can see .NET is making that easy, just dragging controls around, because it has these guides, and we're going to cover that in a future video pretty extensively. But you can see lining it up like that can take time. So that's what these next couple of controls are all about, is saving time by doing that for us. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the toolbox down, and let's collapse the common controls, go back into our containers here. And the first one we're going to look at here is the flow layout panel. So I'm going to grab this and drag it onto our form here. And you can see it's pretty much a panel, just like our panel above. Works the same way. Pretty much everything is exact. We got a couple new properties on here. The difference is when we put controls in it, it's going to automatically line them up. And just to show you what I mean here, let's go ahead and drag some controls on here. I'm going to expand the toolbox. I'm going to pin it down here so we can work with it, because we're going to add a bunch of controls here. Let's go ahead and add a checkbox just by double-clicking on it. I'll add another one. And let's add a radio button, maybe another radio button. How about we add a label and a text box. And then we'll add a couple of buttons. Alright, so we got tons of controls inside of here. And now let me go ahead and hide the toolbox once again. But now, you can see just by adding them in, it's automatically lining them up. And when it gets to the end and it needs to break, it automatically breaks down and keeps going left to right here. And you have control over that if you want it to go left to right, or if you want it to go right to left. And you can see here it's flow direction, or even top down or bottom up. So you have control over the flow direction, and you know that'll really come into play when you're dynamically adding controls to this form. And another thing that we do have control over, only not in the properties window, is we can set these brakes ourselves. So say we wanted 2 checkboxes up here, and then a radio brake right here, and then 2 radio buttons, and then a label with a text box and a brake, and then 2 buttons. Well, we can certainly do that. And actually, let's go ahead and delete one of these buttons, and let's shrink this up a little bit, because we're going to put basically our checkbox on one line, our radio buttons on one line, and then our label, text box, and button all on its own line, kind of like we have up here. So we just simply need to set a breakpoint, or set a flow break as we call it, after checkbox 2 and after radio button 2, and that should give us the look that we're looking for here to line up all of our controls on their own line. So in order to do this again, we have to use the set flow break method, and we can only do this in code. So what we need to do is double click on our form to get into the form load event. That's where we're going to put this code for now. And what we're going to do here is just do a me to reference all the controls on the current form, and then there's our flow layout panel that we're working with here. If we hit a dot here, you can see here's the method that we're looking for, set flow break. And if we use this method, it's going to expect a few parameters, the first one being the control that we're looking to set the brake or remove the brake on. In this case, we're going to set the brake on our checkbox 2. So if we do a me.checkbox 2, and then the value being true, meaning yes, we want to set a flow brake, that should break off all the rest of the controls after checkbox 2 onto its own line. And then we want to do that again. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code, paste it, and we're just going to change this to our radio button 2. There it is. So what that should do for us, if we go ahead and let's just make sure that on our My Project here that our layout control form is the startup form. You can see it is the startup form, so we're okay there. Close out of our property pages. What that'll do, it should break, look at that, after checkbox 2 and after radio button 2. Now everything lines up great. Now you will have a little work to do on things such as labels that are auto size. Just to show you here, if we run back to our form and we take our label off of auto sizing here, there it is. And then we size it here according to our text box. Yeah, it looks about, and then you need to change the text align on it to, how about the middle here, middle left. There we go. Now our label will line up with our text box and our button control as well. So if we hit run again, just to show you, there we go. Now everything lines up pretty good. You can see our button's a little bit bigger than our text box, so that's why that doesn't quite line up right. But hey, you know, there's a little bit of fidgeting to do, but not too much. Really where the power of the flow panel comes into play is when you're dynamically adding controls to your form and to these panels, because you know adding them by hand, no problem, you can visually get those the way you want them to, but dynamically getting things to space right dynamically is very hard, setting these things in code. So that's where the flow layout panel really shines, is it allows us to add things dynamically, and they'll be, you know, they'll line up very good, very close, if not exact, most of the time. Now, one other little thing I want to show you there back in the code window is the set flow break is good for setting and taking you know, breaks on and off of controls. The other thing you can do, there's actually a get flow break. If you ever need to read a control to see where it's at, there's a get flow break, and then you pass it to control, and it'll tell you, give you a true, a Boolean value of true or false, letting you know if there's a flow break on that control. So, just wanted to point that out there. Now, let's take a look at the table layout panel. And this is and also works just like these other controls. The difference here is it's a lot more powerful because we can really structure our controls to be pretty much exactly where we want them. And we do that because we have a kind of a column, row, cell layout. And to give you an example here, let's open up the toolbox and let's go into our container controls again. And here's our table layout panel. So you can see we lay it out just kind of like an HTML table or a Word table or even an Excel spreadsheet, anything like that. It's pretty much what a table is here. And here's what it looks like. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually edit. And by the way, pretty much all the same properties that are on here are on these other ones as well. It's just that we have all the table properties as well now. Columns, cell borders, visible. So you have control over everything within here. Other than that, pretty much everything is the exact same. And you can manipulate these properties here just by clicking on the smart tag here. We're going to cover these smart tags a little later. But basically, if we choose edit rows and columns, you can see this will open up this little dialog box here that we can edit our rows and our columns. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a way for us to move items between list boxes. And I'll show you how this works. This is actually a perfect implementation for this type of flow layout table. But basically what we're going to do here is we're going to add one more column on here. All right. And we're going to make our first one 40% of the width of the table. Our second one here will make 20%, and our third one we're also going to make 40%. Alright, so you can see that's how that'll look. And let's go ahead and choose our mode here to rows, and we're going to add 4 rows. And these are all going to be 25% across the board. So we'll make that 25, I'll copy it, make that 25, make this percent 25. You can see by default it comes on as absolute. We're just going to do a percentage here. You can also choose it to auto size, but that should be good for now. If we hit OK, you can see here's how it looks. Now what we want to do is add some controls to it. The first thing we're going to add here is how about we go to our common controls, and let's add a list view. I'm going to drag a list view right into our cell right there. I'll copy this, and we'll paste it so we've got 2 list views on here. You can see right by default it only expands 1 cell. Well, the nice thing is when you add a control into a table, what it'll do is it'll add a property inside of these controls called column span and row span. Right? Now we actually want the row span for this to be 4. We want to span all 4 of the rows. You can see it didn't do it by default because it's just going to the default size of the control, but this is where the dock property comes in handy. If we head on up to dock here and choose full, look at that, it's going to dock full to all 4 of those rows within that column. We'll do the same thing with this one. We'll set the dock here to full, and now we just need to set the row span to 4. Look at that. Now the next thing we need to do is get some buttons in here. So let's go to our toolbox, drag a button on here, and put it right inside of this cell. We're going to do the same thing. Let's go ahead and dock this button. And we'll dock it full. And let's go ahead and do the same thing here for a couple other buttons. I'm just going to paste it in here. Paste all of our other buttons in. And then all we need to do is something like this. We need to put some text on here, so we have one going that way. So that way if we highlight an item in this list box, hit this button, it'll go over to this list box. And then usually you'll see something like this too, where you can send all the items over. And then we'll just do the reverse of that. So that way and that way. So if you haven't seen anything like this, it's just a simple way to move items from list box to list box. Say you're enabling items or adding items to a list based on a database, things of that nature. This is a great way to do it, the table layout panel. Now we have everything docked in here. If we have a sizable form, these will all automatically take control of it, assuming we set up our table flow panel to do so. But this is a really nice way to do this. And also if you have other controls within these cells, they will also flow just as our flow panel did above. So, great implementation, great way to really aid in user interface design using all the panel controls, specifically the new panel controls, because they'll help us align our controls properly and evenly. Alright, let's move on to our last couple of controls here, which is the tab control and the split container control. So we'll open our form here, tab split controls form, which has nothing on it currently. Let's head on over to the toolbox here and start with the split container. If we click on this control, drag it onto our form here, you see it's going to fill up the form entirely. And basically what this control allows us to do is really work with real estate and give user control over different segments of real estate. In this case, the split container comes on here with, you can see 2 little areas here, panel 1 and panel 2. And in the middle, it's kind of a splitter bar, because if you hold your mouse in the middle of it and drag it around here, you can see you can drag it around. This is what the user will be able to do. They'll be able to size segments of your application. Right? Now, it doesn't stop here. You could actually drag another split container on here. Say you wanted to do something like this. Right? Drag another one on here, and then we could take the second one, and we could turn the orientation here to horizontal, and look at that. Now we have it going both ways. Pretty cool, huh? So that's kind of how the split container works. And what we can do then is control these panels, and we can put controls within these, which will dock inside of them. I'll give you a good example here. Something that's fairly common. Let's go ahead and grab a tree view control. I'm just going to throw this in this panel over here, right? And then we're going to take the dock property and we will choose this to fill, so it'll fill up the left-hand side. Kind of reminding you of Outlook at this point, right? Very similar. And then what we can do over here is we're going to even really take the real estate to another level here, because I'm going to show you how to use this tab control. So we'll collapse the common controls, go back into our containers, and drag the tab control over into this panel, and we'll do the same thing here. Well, let's go ahead and dock this control to fill its region, and there we go. Then we could even do something down here. We could maybe if this area could be based on this area, so whatever you do up here could be a description or detailed data of whatever in here. So let's go ahead and grab a list view in the common controls here. We'll grab a list view, we'll drag it down into this panel, and then we'll also dock this guy here too. So go to our dock property, hit fill, and look at that. Now we have an interface that makes great use of all the real estate and allows the user to resize it to their comfort level. Now, before I get into this tab control, let me just talk a little bit more about the split container, tell you what it's all about here and how it works. Let's go ahead and drop down our object list here.